Bertie Ahern, can I come to you first? There's been trouble on the streets in London, Derry today. We know that the institutions of Northern Ireland are in suspension, as they've been for 9 of the past 25 years. But the picture is transformed in terms of peace across Northern Ireland. Tell me, how far has this accord fulfilled your hopes and expectations at the time that the deal was done?
Well, I suppose in those final weeks, 25 years ago, our biggest concern was that rather than complete this deal and that we might end up with even more violence. And I think my big concern was, and the concern of the security people, north and south, was that if we failed to get an agreement, that we'd be back into another cycle. And that was the security advice from both London and from MI5, MI6, from the Garda Síochána, from the RUC as it was then. So I think the fact is we have had very good peace. I know there's a crowd of kids running around in Derry tonight throwing petrol bombs, but to be honest, you get that in lots of city, kids running around. Once is no more serious than that. But I think we have got peace. The politics and the politicians have not been as good, John. The Stormont, the institutions have been very hit and miss. That's a disappointment. And hopefully we can make some progress in that. But we haven't made a lot of progress really with the political end of it.
Did you hope for better at the time, 25 years ago, given how far apart the different sides were, to see the cooperation that's existed since then, even with the suspensions that have happened?
Yeah, I did expect better. I did expect better, and unfortunately, I don't believe the political politicians and the leadership. But like we were doing really well when Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness was there. We were doing not too bad when Seamus Mallon and David Trimble were there. Peter Robinson and Mark McGuinness were doing exceptionally well. I think Mark will correct me, but I think they were there for about 5 or 6 years. They were operating the system. So it is of more recent times that we've had this stop-start, and it's unhelpful. And because Northern Ireland has lots of problems, and the thing we learned about the North for the last 50 years, but certainly for the last 30, is that whenever there's a vacuum, things tend to go to the streets.
Yes.
And that's been the concern, and it still is my concern. Hopefully we can get the institutions back up and running, but it does require a bit of a leap of faith and a bit of good leadership. Yeah. By certainly the DUP and other parties to respond to that.
But I want to bring in Mark Devonport at this point then. Mark, again, great to have you with us. I mean, you've watched every moment of this time since the Good Friday Agreement was signed. Is your feeling this week, as we prepare to commemorate that moment, is it one of disappointment in what has happened since, or do you celebrate?
I think on balance, this still has to be seen as a great success, just purely on the peace element of the deal, because there are hundreds of people walking around today who wouldn't be walking around if it hadn't been for the deal in 1998. But when I first went out to Northern Ireland in the 1980s as a young reporter, the news was full of a sort of a day-to-day litany of killings. And there was a general expectation that that would carry on forever, John. And instead, in the course of the 1990s, first with the IRA and Loyalist ceasefires of 1994, and then with the Good Friday Agreement, really the tide of history was changed.
Yes.
Now, there are obvious problems. It hasn't delivered, as Bertie Ahern was saying there, on the political side in the way it was intended. But still, on balance, it's something that has to be celebrated.
Yeah, I mean, Bertie Ahern, the Democratic Unionist Party, we all know, are refusing to go back into power sharing as set out by the Good Friday Agreement. They have their objections to the deal struck under the Northern Ireland Protocol. Do you accept their objections are held in good faith? I mean, there are some critics, aren't there, who say, well, the DUP, they don't want to serve under a Sinn Féin First Minister. What's your take?
Well, Jeffrey Donaldson has assured me personally that is not the position. So I've no reason to doubt him. But there are plenty of people who think that. And, south of the border, I think it's probably maybe the majority think that. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that one. I think This is the point the DUP are making. Now, I'm not going to say I agree or disagree with it, but I just make the point that they're now saying. They're saying that if there are any laws or regulations coming from Brussels, that they should be codified through UK law, so that in that Northern Ireland, or the politicians in Northern Ireland, don't get stuck with being blamed for something that's coming out of the European Union. If it comes to UK, they live with that. That's the nut point. That now I'm not going to say I agree this way, but we're trying to resolve the problem. So that's how they see it.
Yes.
And I believe that now when I asked them what do they need on that, do they need a letter from Rishi Sunak? And they say no, they need legislation. Now, I don't know what Rishi Sunak would be legislating, but anyway, I'm just giving you their point of view. And what we want to do is to try and find a way around that so we can get on with.
Well, legislation, Mark, is not going to happen, is it? What's it going to take to get the power sharing up and running again, do you think, Mark?
Well, I think it's possible that Rishi Sunak might be able to put in some bit of legislation, but it would have to be rather cosmetic, because he cannot really demur from the Windsor Framework deal that he's already done with the EU. The question is, I suppose, whether time might prove to be a bit of a healer here. There was no surprise to the fact that the DUP weren't going to go back to power sharing in order to celebrate the 25th anniversary of a deal that they opposed at the time. Yeah. And they weren't going to go back in order to please President Joe Biden just before he comes into town.
Yeah.
But they may go back after they get some local council elections that are due in May over and done with, and after they've been given potentially a little bit more economic and legislative assurance of the kind that Bertie Ahern's referring to.
Okay, look, Bertie Ahern, I know you are pressed for time, and again, thank you for joining us. I want to finally put two in for the price of one here. Irish reunification. Is that for you a realistic prospect now? And if it is, on what time frame? And what about you personally? I see there's talk of a political comeback for you. Is that going to happen?
Well, I'm not going to run for the Dáil again. I've spent nearly 4 decades there, so that's not going to happen. No, listen, the way I look at Irish unity...
What about president?
Well, I'm not getting into that. There's a president there for another few years, so we leave him continue on his excellent job. Michael Lee is a good man. So, and I support him strongly. So I think that this is the position on Irish unity. It is permitted within the Good Friday Agreement that there can be plebiscites from time to time. And I believe there will be in the future. But until we have institutions that are sustainable and that are running smoothly and well, that's number one. And number two, until the preparatory work is done, which it's not, or it's hardly started, then there's not going to be a serious referendum. So there will be referendums in the future on Irish unity, but not in the short term, or maybe in the medium term.
Within this decade?
If it is, it'll be the very end.
Well, I'm John Pienaar, and if you found that interesting, we are here each day, Monday to Thursday, 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock on Drive, and from 7 till 8, Pienaar and Friends, where we discuss the big stories of the day each day on Times Radio.